Please help me welcome our speaker, the lovely Angelina Sabatini. Angelina is the manager of training at Live Nation Entertainment, and we are thrilled to have her on our virtual stage. Angelina, the session is all yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cracking the C-Suite Code. I am thrilled to be here with you all today. I think this is such an important topic to dive into as L&D professionals and strategic partners in the business. So I'm really excited for you all to join me as we dive in and crack the code together. Again, I know Casey mentioned it's a very interactive session. So if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A because we want to make sure that we dive into all those things. Don't feel like you have to wait until the very end. I am always really big on organic conversations and seeing where we naturally tend to lean into. So feel free to ask away. But as we kick off today, I am really excited to be with learning pros who actually understand the thrill of an LMS update, or doing a request for proposal when it comes to learning software and learning and development. I love to geek out on all those things, so I'm so excited for you to be here today. But really getting into our topic, I really want everybody to understand here's the truth about what we do and how we lead in our business is that we really invest billions of dollars in learning every year. And most CFOs still see learning and development as a cost center. And so, how do we really navigate the reflection of being a cost center to a growth driver in our business? And so that's why where we come in, it's not that the C suite doesn't really understand or doesn't believe in people, it's that they can't see the proof. And so, how do we show up in a way that understands and resonates with others? And our job really isn't to work harder, but to communicate smarter. We already believe in what we do as L&D professionals. We get really excited and pumped up and all this phenomenal energy. And so how do we turn that energy and excitement into a way that resonates with others? And so throughout my career, I have found really memorable moments where I had to shift my way of communicating and thinking differently to really make sure that my message resonated. And it's really not about changing your message, it's about leading authentically and telling your story. But how do you share that story in a way that resonates with others, where they can see themselves in that moment? And how do we share where it relates to them? And the biggest takeaway in my life was the birth of my son. He's up here on the screen. He's 2.5 and a giant. He's very big, but that's where a lot of my communication shifted. I pride myself on being a good communicator. I think I am pretty strategic in the way I tell my story, but you really should ask my 2-year-old because in this picture, you can see I asked him to put away his toys or to clean up. I wasn't very clear in that the toys needed to go into the bin. So my son Caden went into the bin as part of the cleanup process. And so moments like this teach us that when we're communicating, it isn't what you say, it's what the other person understands. And so it's really interesting when we think we're being clear. Does our message really resonate with the people that we're talking to in a way that they understand, and can talk through that? So if you think I'm a good communicator, I always like to remind myself am I being clear? Go ask my son Caden, and then he'll tell me if I'm being clear or not. So that's the importance of communication and how we share our message. But let's get into it and let's be real. We need a corporate version of Google Translate, and getting a seat at the executive table isn't always easy for us. We say engagement, they hear expense. We say learning journey, they hear time off the floor. And so asking a CFO if training is performing, most of the time they'll say, I don't know, which is alarming and a little concerning. But it's that we haven't communicated in a way that they understand. And it's not that they don't believe in L&D, it's that they don't understand how we measure success. And there is no other single function in our organizations that get a pass on proving how they communicate revenue, whether it's expense reduction or performance outcomes. So why do we? right? How do we show up, share the same messaging as every other function or every other department within the organization to ensure that our message is being heard and that we're really leveraging our seat as a thought partner at the table? Because we're not actually on different sides, we're just using different vocabulary. So L&D says skills, the business says performance. We say engagement, they say retention. The key isn't to change what we do, it's just to connect what we do to what they care about. And so, something I've learned in my career is the how to get to yes. And it's something that's been really differentiating for me in the way that we communicate with leaders throughout the organization or through other organizations. And that's really understanding their pain points, what motivates them, and how do we get to yes together? Because it's really about a blended partnership. And so, understanding where they're coming from, how they relate their business needs to our initiatives, and how do we really get to yes at the end as a partnership together really will help us where our language then becomes our influence. And so it's where we directly align our top business goals, deliver measurable outcomes, and earn executive trust. So again, not about changing the story, it's just about telling it in a different language. Something I find incredibly fascinating and absolutely mind blowing, I still can't believe it when I did the math, is that companies spend over $400 billion a year on learning. And truthfully, that's basically the GDP of Denmark. I Every time I say it out loud, it still resonates with a mind blowing emoji. But yet, only 8% of our CEOs say that they see learning as a performance driver and not as that cost center. And so it really relates back to two things. It isn't a belief problem, it's a proof problem. And so when we know learning transforms people, but they need to see how it transforms the numbers. And if we can prove that link between L&D, um, or if we can't prove that link as L&D, then we keep getting labeled as a cost center. So how do we really turn it around in a way that they see the gap between learning and leadership perception again isn't about the proof or is about proof and not the value. So a great thing to do here is really understanding how we audit our current programs. Do your metrics demonstrate business value or completion rates? And so really making sure that we're understanding how it ties back to the business. How does it tie back to the number that they're looking for and translating in a way that feels not only authentic and holistic to you, but also to the other person. Because as Kaden reminds us, that communication might not always be as clear as we think it is. And then really understanding, I love this imagery here, talking about proof and ROI and belief and passion, because as L&D professionals, we are incredibly passionate about people and a people first mindset. And so we really are in understanding the belief that people have this unlimited potential. And we see possibility in everyone and in everything. And business speaks in data and not declarations. So, how do we turn that gap between passion and proof is where our credibility is earned or lost? And the great thing about this is we are that bridge that gaps who we are to what we do. And we don't really have to pick sides. And we get to translate and move organically through this bridge to really understand and win the hearts and stories that earn trust with our staff. So when our passion meets proof, people really start to show up and listen. And if we start with belief, strengthen it with proof, and watch our influence grow, it's really a magical moment for us as business leaders because passion isn't enough. We always need proof. And so, how do we get to proof? We get to proof through this beautiful way of having and living a leadership mindset. And it's one of the biggest reasons L&D doesn't get pulled into strategic conversations. It's a hard truth. It's not always great to hear, but we don't always show up. like we belong there. And so before we ask for a seat at the table, we need to look in the mirror and truly ask ourselves, have we earned it? Have we truly earned it? The mind shift goes through they don't see our value to what am I doing to show my value? How am I showing up today that says, I already belong here? This is my seat, claiming that seat, and really making sure that we're showing up in a way where we are just like every other department lead, that we come in with the mindset of strategic thought partner. And so when we come into saying, how can we help? Which we do a lot. I personally know that I do it often. It can be well intentioned, but unintentionally keeps us in this box. So instead of being seen as a business partner, we show up like customer service reps. And that's not what our benefit is. That's not how we truly resonate within the organization and show up. If we want to start to be part of the business conversations, we have to start sounding like the business leaders. Leaders don't wait to be told what to measure. We go out and they define success. Again, no other function gets a pass on impact, not finance, not ops, not marketing, and neither should we. We don't have to stop being the heart of the business. We just need to bring a spreadsheet to the heart party. Being a business partner means walking with data, strategy, and solutions that move the needle. We're not just trainers, we're really the translators of impact. And that's where our story begins. We love engagement numbers, our smile sheets, our completion rates, and that's all great. But no CFO is framing your completion chart on a wall like their child's artwork. We need metrics that speak their language and meeting them where they are. So we talk retention, sales, guest satisfaction, and productivity. This isn't abandoning our soft metrics, it's really just aligning them to the hard ones. Because what we need to understand is proof talks louder than passion, and it's how we earn that right to lead. Because we can't just say we're strategic, we have to show it. Data is our credibility builder. It's how we show up. It's how our proof talks louder than passion. Something I've learned from a great mentor of mine is the evidenced by framework. And we'll get into that a little bit here shortly. But really, how are we showing our proof? How are we measuring success? And what is the evidence that we've achieved that? And so, really talking about telling a story and how do we have an impact? So, here in the part of the business world forgets data may prove your case, but stories is what makes it memorable. And I know we have some great storytellers on our webinar today. And the C suite doesn't need more spreadsheets, they need stories that connect the dots. And so, how do you all, as storytellers, really make that resonate within your organizations? So, a great example of this that I love to use is after leadership training, turnover dropped 15%. And one manager said, I finally feel equipped to lead. Not only does that fill my heart with joy and fill my cup that they feel equipped to lead, but I also was able to position it in a way that the data spoke for itself and that it really resonated with other leadership at the table. And so that's really where we tie in the heart and proof, because what we need to understand is emotion opens the doors, but evidence is what keeps it open. And so leading with heart and backing it with numbers is what really resonates. So, what is your story saying? And if you have a moment to drop it in the chat, I'd love to hear what your story is saying within your organization. So, share a true instance where you transform data into a compelling business narrative. How did you pair data with humanity? And how did you tell a story that really resonated at all levels through your organization? So, if you feel inclined to do so, go ahead and drop something in the chat, because I really challenge you all when you write your next leadership report as a story with characters, tension, and resolution, you'll see that it really makes a difference in how people relate, understand, and see you as a growth revenue driver. So let's get into one of my favorite things I've learned over the years. And this is really the evidence by mindset shifts and an activity to accountability. And so here is a really easy formula to follow. So let's talk about the goal leads to behavior, evidence by, and then the business outcome. And so, what does that really mean for us? A great way to or a great example of this is improved communication skills evidenced by a 10% increase in engagement scores and fewer team escalations. So now let's translate completion into retention, learning hours into revenue, and engagement into productivity. So if you didn't put in the chat last time, I'd love for some of you to go ahead and tell me how you translate completion into retention or learning hours into revenue in your business. This is a great framework that just allows us to articulate what we're translating just a little differently because it's not about tracking everything, it's just about proving the right things. And so the takeaway here in this moment is proof isn't perfection, it's progress. And as a recovering perfectionist, I know that all too well, that sometimes it's just about showing the proof and not allowing the perfection to take over. Because leadership isn't a title, it's a mindset. And we can't wait to be involved in strategic conversations. We have to walk in ready, showing up like we already belong there. The C suite isn't handing out golden tickets, but they are watching who walks in prepared with data, clarity, and confidence. And if your C suite is handing out gold tickets, please also message that in the chat because I'd love to learn more. What this really means is understanding your business model, financial drivers, and understanding the pain points. So, as I mentioned earlier, how do we get to yes? What are some things that we really know resonate with other departments? Early in my career, I was doing a request for proposal on a learning management system. And I really wanted the new system to achieve the goals for the business and for our people. Because to me, if our people weren't going to use it, it was going to be like that gym membership we signed up for on January 1st and stopped using by February. And so, how did we get to yes in that moment? So, it was asking a minimum of 5 questions that I already understood their pain points. They were frustrated that the content wasn't translatable, right? This new system was able to achieve that. That's how we got to yes. And so when you start stacking questions to answer yes or to solve the problem that inherently reflects their pain points and getting that achieved outcome, we really start to build that confidence and clarity and really getting them to commit to part of the ownership of that process. And so when we understand our business model and we understand our financial drivers and pain points, we're able to move forward in successful outcomes that not only achieve our goals, but achieve the goals for others, and really making sure that we're showing up with ideas, solving those problems, and backing it by the evidence. Because leaders don't want to be told what to measure. We don't. We want to define success, track it, and communicate it in a business language. When we show up only as the training department, we unintentionally shrink our influence. But when we show up as business leaders who happen to specialize in training, everything changes. And I've experienced this several times throughout my evolution of my career, and even now as a parent. When we show up as our authentic self and as the leader we know we are, who specializes in something else, doors and possibility open, and everything becomes just endless. So we will not succeed as leaders in the business unless we act like leaders in the business. Influence starts with accountability and how we're willing to show up and how we see ourselves in this moment. And so, a tool that we'll share with you all today after this call, Casey will share it with the recording and then, of course, the deck and this activity. But we really wanted to make sure that you could apply what you've learned today. And so, there are conferences or experiences or webinars that give you tools to convince our leaders to send us. to take the time to be with us today. And so this workshop or worksheet really helps us prove why it mattered and why your time is valuable and how you can actually gravitate to what you learned today and apply it in real world scenario and how it impacts the business. So you're going to capture what you learned, how you're going to apply it, and how it connects back to the business results. This becomes your advocacy story for your next year's budget. So, for those of you that want to go to a conference, attend a webinar, travel, or be a part of something bigger than just your organization, this is a great way to advocate your story and really leverage it because we know money is tight in learning and development. But if we're willing to spend $400 billion a year, I'm sure we can find a little wiggle room in that purse to really make sure we're achieving our goals. And so the story doesn't end where the conference does or the ELB digital experience does. It's where proof begins. And so today, really take the time to reflect in your own ROI story. When you get this handout, you'll be able to go through it, really apply what you learned, how it's going to relate back to the business. But it's a great way to take anything that you've learned. Wonderful mentor of mine and I have talked immensely about this topic. And so we use this in all areas of our life, whether it's a conference, a webinar, our end of year review and projects you've worked on. Just because the project hasn't made it across the finish line doesn't mean that you didn't invest in the work to see the project through, even though maybe it was scrapped at the last moment or things like that. So, how do we communicate those things when it's the end of year, when we're negotiating our budgets, when we're negotiating salary increases? And how do we really resonate and speak in a language that our leaders will understand? So, I hope you enjoy this handout when you get some time to go through it. And if you want to connect offline, we can really go through it together and dive in a little deeper. But let's talk about transformation because really we need to understand we have to go from a cost center to a growth driver. And this is our story of evolution because if we don't evolve, we will become extinct. Not a beautiful story to hear, but it's the truth. And the shift we're capable of making. If finance is the favorite child, it's time we become the overachieving middle one. And as an overachiever, I know we can do it. Every other function reports and results. Marketing has metrics, finance has forecasts, operations has dashboards, and so now we do too. It's not that the data defines us, but completes the story we're trying to tell. And that's how we shift from being viewed as nice to have to a must have. We really need to look at redefining our roles from function to force. And how do we create a dashboard that visually connects learning to results? That might look different for everybody on this call or for your organizations, but I know that you can be proud to share your ROI and understanding and sharing the passion of what connects learning to your results. And when we speak the language of impact, we stop asking for a seat at the table and we start leading the conversation. Because again, belief opens the door, proof builds that trust, and that's where our influence lives. When we blend belief and evidence, we truly become unstoppable. We win hearts with stories, earn trust with stats, and the future of L&D is where heart and data finally meet. We talk about credibility comes from clarity. And so how do we align every L&D initiative with both purpose and performance? So if you have a moment, go ahead and drop it in the chat and let's hear how some of your initiatives have both purpose and performance tied in. I'll give everybody just a quick second. And as you can see, I have a little mantra or connection that I use on the daily, but it's to teach boldly, connect authentically, and lead strategically. Because we don't need permission to lead, We just need the courage to show up like we already do. And so when we teach boldly, we bring energy, expertise to every moment. When we connect authentically, it's because relationships drive influence. And when we lead strategically, it's because L&D doesn't just build people, we build business. And we can all do it with a little data and a little heart. You're not just a part of the business, you are the business. So after you leave here today, initiate one conversation about your impact, how you show up. Leave here feeling energized, unstoppable, and knowing that you are part of the reason the business is where it is today. And so I'd love to connect with you all. Casey, do we have anything in Q&A before we move on? And
We do. We actually have two really good questions.
okay, great.
One from Melissa. She asked, how do we determine if things like retention are connected to training?
That's a great question, Melissa. When we talk about retention to training, it's really about understanding the numbers. And so when you're pulling that data, really looking at the big picture. So, what is your retention number telling you? Is it high or is it low? What are the things that impact that number? It could be several things when we're looking at training. It could be hiring for fit versus need, right? Are we really taking the time to look in the mirror and say that we're hiring this person because they're the best fit or because we just need the head count? And then what is the story that we tell ourselves? Sometimes we live in this world where we've done things the same way just because that's the way we've always done it in training. And it really requires us to evolve and look at things a little different and think outside the box. And so when you're looking at that number, whether it's high or low, it'll start to tell you what's really happening. A great way to understand the number is to also seek the advice from others. So it may require you to go out and talk to your field partners or the people that are impacting the guest experience to really capture more data because the number is the number, but we might need other additional facts to help us build that puzzle or that big picture to really understand, is it training? Is it operations? Is it communication? Is it accountability? It could be so many things. So you might need to go out and ask open-ended questions or do some reflective listening to better understand how that relates back to the number and then being able to understand where that ties in to your training. But great question.
We got another good one.
Yeah.
It's Andrea or Andrea, I'm not sure, forgive me. But they ask what to do in a TLDR, too long, don't read world with CEOs too busy wanting just the data, maybe not having time for the emotion in order to get the evidence.
Oh my goodness, I love that question. Thank you so much. And something I can share, I have a beautiful story for this. So I was doing a request for proposal on a new learning management system, and I was so pumped. I was a new director of training at a past organization, and this was going to be my baby. This was going to be the big project that was really going to turn things around. And I remember I also have an instructional design background, so I love a beautifully crafted deck and I love pictures and imagery. And I also have a background in psychology. So I built, this beautiful outline and it had case studies and how we were going to do the things. And it was this whole like path to success, basically. And I'd spent a lot of time on it. And I had put together a deck that was larger than it should be. The joke is like if a deck is 46 slides when an email will do, or a one pager will do. It wasn't 46 slides, but you get my drift. And I show up into the president's office. I sit down to explain, I started with 10, we got to 5. Here's my top 3. Here's my number 1. Here's the learning management system that I know is going to move the business, inspire our people, and really help with the metrics. And I will never forget, I'm looking at the deck, I'm looking at my case study and my beautiful project proposal and saying, putting it down. And he didn't even look at it, didn't even look at it. And he was like, Angelina, that's great. He's flying at 90,000 feet. I'm flying at 30,000 feet. He's like, tell me the story. And I said, I could have forgotten my birthday in that moment. I was just so paralyzed by the fact that I had done and crafted this beautiful work and he didn't even look at it. But looking back on it, he was like, tell me the story. And I said, we were working with franchisees at the time. And so negotiating dollars and budgets when you're already asking people to spend their own money is a hard sell. And so I'm sitting across from him and I'm taking a deep breath and trying to pause. And I remember saying, can we hire 3 people per restaurant? And he said, a year. And he said, yes. I said, can we retain those 3 people per restaurant per year? And he said, yes. I said, then the system pays for itself because I knew the cost of I know the dollar amount of what it costs to apply and retain an employee. And so I knew what that number was. And I could say, like, if we do this thing, bring on this new system, yes, it has inherently a little bit more cost, but what is our return on the back end? Something that will grow with us, grow with the business, and help our people, than the 3 people. And he said, that's all I needed to know. Let's move forward. Let me look over the contract and we'll have a further discussion. And so I could have been paralyzed by the fear or by the question itself, but it's again comes back to how we translate and how we resonate because we don't see everybody's story, whether it's personally or professionally. And so they might have a lot of things going on at the C suite that we're just don't have visibility to, nor do we need to. But what we do need to understand is that time is money. And how do we come in and have a conversation and communicate in a way that's relevant for them, answers their questions, gets them what they need so that we can both say yes and both get what we need out of, the partnership and the conversation. Did that help answer that a little bit? Or can I elaborate on that a little bit more?
She said in the chat, so if the story is short and includes and ends with the numbers, then we're good.
Yeah, typically, I mean, it's about the person, right? And it's about the department. So I come in with a case study or this beautiful deck when a 1 pager with bullet points would do. Another great example of this was I was working for a new VP of operations, and I would build, the weekly newsletter or the weekly communications that would go out to 200 locations. And I will never forget walking into the office to have the VP look over the comms and approve it before it would go out. And she said, Angelina, that's great. This is a lot of information. There are a lot of words here. Go back and do it again. And I was like, what? Go back and do it again. And she's like, they're operators. Their attention span is 3 clicks or less. Bullet points, like they need to be able to skim, get what they need, make a decision, and move on. And so I think it's not necessarily about shortening the story, it's about giving them the information that they need to be able to like digest, make a decision and move on. And so maybe that is a deck, maybe that is a case study, maybe that is just a quick email, maybe that's bullet points. It's just better understanding. And a great way, if you don't know, is to ask the question, right? There's no harm in showing up and saying, how do you best like to receive information? How do you best like to be communicated to? And when we start to understand how that impacts the other person, it's not that always have to cater to that style, but we understand that style and how we adapt our style to them, to really come together. Does that better help answer that question?
She said yes and thank you.
Okay.
We might have time for one more question. I'm seeing a couple more flood
Okay.
in. But let's see. Melanie asks, any tips to share? She has to present a 90-day pilot to streamline L&D for a conglomerate. Each sector has their own training or none, and it's all over the place. She wants to present a plan that's low risk to align to the business outcomes. Any tips for her?
Yeah, I think, Melanie, that is a big undertaking. And we can talk a little bit more offline because I know we're going to get to time. But some best tricks is with really understanding the business needs and what are the pain points. And I really circle back to that. And the reason I say understanding each department's pain points for this 90-day pilot is because everybody's department um, measures success a little differently, right? Marketing has like ops has dashboards, finance has forecasts, marketing has metrics. So everybody does it a little differently, but it all comes back down to the data and it all comes back to trying to solve a pain point or create a solution. And so when we better understand that, it's like, okay, this causes this pain point, this causes this pain point, this causes this pain point. How do we rewrite the question to say this is going to solve for X, Y, and Z? We can't solve for everything in a 90-day pilot, especially in a conglomerate when you've got multiple divisions. I know that firsthand coming from a big corporation, but there are ways that you can ask the question to tie back into what they're measuring for success. And if you don't know, challenge you to be courageous and connect authentically in a way that says, how do you measure success? I had a conversation with somebody earlier today, and I said, tell me how we're measuring success. How do we know if this 90-day pilot, how do we know if it does well? Right? It's not that we just launched it and released it out to the world in this energy and we just cross our fingers and hope. It's like, how do we know we're measuring success? Especially because we're wrapping up towards the end of the year where we're going to start doing performance reviews if you haven't already had yours. And, how do I say that this project or this initiative measures back to success for me? Or how do we adapt and evolve? And so, if we don't always have that information, I think sometimes we want to assume best intent and we want to assume that we know, but it's okay to not know. And it's okay to say, I'm not sure how you relate to this. Can you explain this to me a little bit more so I have a better understanding? And it's not to come out and say, I have no idea. It's just, how do you word the question a little bit where you can get the information you need and start using it almost like an investigation process. I love a good crime show, but like start asking investigative questions to get the information that you need to start building out your program. Did that help answer that question?
Yes, I think she says, thank you. Love the how do we know? And she'd like to chat offline too. So we'll provide
Okay.
Angelina's information so you guys can continue the conversation. I do think we do have time to wrap up these last two questions.
Okay.
Um, Catherine asks, how much evidence is deemed significant for a C-suite?
I would say it depends on your C-suite, right? Because everybody is a little different. I think it's really back to what they measure, and people will tell you, right, what resonates with them when you start asking when you start listening. A great thing to do is start observing your C suite if you're in the meetings or if you're in conversations. And if you're not in the meeting or the conversation, how do you ask questions to your manager or to your leader who might be in those conversations to say what resonates? Back to that example of this beautiful case study where all I needed to do was give bullet points and tell a quick story. I think it just depends on the leader, but if you can relate it back basically to three things. One, does it drive revenue? Two, does it reduce an expense? Or three, does it relate somehow to the business outcome? If you can show evidence to those three things, that's usually enough or sufficient. They now may want to come back and have more of a conversation about those things, but if you can relate the evidence back by those, you're typically in a good spot.
Perfect. Excuse me. So I think we have time for this last question. She asks, what's your advice for getting a buy-in from different stakeholders when it's not only the CFO making the decision and they have very different evidences that work on each one?
Okay. So in this scenario or in this example, it's really understanding what their needs are. And so I always love to relate it back to having a consultant mindset. Even though we're employees of a business, how do we come in seeking to solve a solution, right? Without saying, I'm here to help, how can I help? All those things. And so coming in with some open-ended questions to better understand what their needs are in the project. Something else I've used in my past life that I'm a full believer in is what we call a scope of work or an SOW. And you can Google it, or I can share my template. I have a template for basically everything. I can share that with you as well. But really understanding what the stakeholders need, who's involved, what level of accountability. And so it's a template that kind of just drafts that all out for you, so that when you're seeking information from a lot of different departments or different people who might have different ideas of what success in those metrics look like, you can start having those conversations. And when it's all kind of laid out, then everybody can look at it as a bigger picture and say, yeah, that works, or no, that doesn't. It might require coming back and having a couple conversations, but it's usually what helps at least put the pieces together for everybody to see it. Because we don't intentionally want to just say me, but sometimes that happens. And so how do we bring the departments together to say we and have a whole bigger holistic approach? Did that help answer that question, Casey?
I believe so. I think that was awesome. Yes, and she said thanks a lot in the chat section as well. No, this
Okay.
was amazing. Thank you so much, Angelina. We so appreciate you offering your expertise. She's provided information there, a QR code if you can, so you can reach out to her. And we'll also provide a link to her LinkedIn page so you can connect with her after the fact. And be sure to let us know in the survey if you'd like to connect with Angelina. If you want to hear from one of our team members for that strategy session. But thank you all so much for joining us. And we hope you stick around for the other sessions we have lined up for ELBX Online. It's going to be another good one. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day and go conquer your week.